Well, I wish I could say it was my idea, because it did seem to be such an obvious idea and a very good idea, but it wasn't. It was the Fleming estate, Ian Fleming Publications, they were wanting to revive the literary side of Bond. The film's been huge for a long time, and there was a danger that people were forgetting where James Bond had originated with the Ian Fleming book, so they wanted to revamp the whole book side of it, and they thought books for kids about young James Bond would be a perfect way to start. They spoke to a number of different writers, established adult thriller writers, established children's writers, and me, for some reason. I had written four adult thrillers in the early 90s, and my editor at the time, Kate Jones at Hamish Hamilton, was working for IFP on this project. And in the end, all of us writers met up inside a giant hollowed-out volcano, sat around a huge marble-top table, and I pulled a lever and all the other writers fell into a shark tank. That's what I say, because I don't actually know, out of all the people, why they chose me.
Did you have to audition for it, or sort of write a piece?
I didn't have to write anything, but I talked about my ideas, how the series might work, how it might work over a series of books, and I met members of the Fleming family. So I was seriously vetted, but no, we didn't have to do a written test.
But
luckily.
Enormous pressure, I would have thought.
Well,
you had to sort of almost reinvent Bond, didn't you?
Well, actually, I mean, when it was presented to me and I started thinking about it, I did, all at the time I thought that would actually be really good fun. I've got 3 boys of my own, right at the target age. I just thought, what a great opportunity to be able to write something that they could like. And I instantly had this idea of sort of reinventing Bond and just scaling it down to a level that kids could relate to, so that they could imagine themselves in the stories. And so, you know, when I was offered the job, it was fantastic, and I just got stuck in and thought, well, this is brilliant. Because it was a couple of years after I started before it was actually announced. It was only towards publication, when they made the announcement this book was going to be out there, that it really struck me. It's like, oh my God, what have I taken on? This is James Bond, you know, what if I screw this up? Well, when I was first given the brief, it was, could it be about Bond at Eton? But I wanted to send him away somewhere exotic.
So you could go and research?
Well, unfortunately, I was so busy writing the book, I couldn't actually get out to Mexico, where the book is set, which is a real shame, because that's the main reason I wrote it, because I really love Mexico. Yeah, so I sent Bond, after the events in Double or Die, Bond is quite badly injured at the end of the book, so he's recuperating, and his Aunt Charmian takes him to Mexico, where she's doing some anthropological research. But of course, he's supposed to be relaxing and recuperating, and the opposite happens. He gets involved in another huge adventure where these 2 children are kidnapped by a gang of American gangsters, and he has to go along and try and save them by pretending to be a Mexican street criminal. He gets in with the gang, and they have these adventures through Mexico, and they end up on a Caribbean island. I had to get something in the Caribbean in there, because Fleming loved the Caribbean. He had a house in Jamaica, so he ends up on this Caribbean island, which is a kind of hangout for criminals. Well, I grew up in the 1960s, and that was the era of James Bond. He was just about the coolest thing around, and Thunderball was probably the height of Bond mania. Something like 1 in 3 people in America saw that film. So it was impossible really not to be a James Bond fan if you were a boy in the 1960s. And then when I was older, I got around to reading the Ian Fleming books, which are still fantastically readable today. They're still great fun. So, you know, my whole life has been sort of... I'm not obsessed with Bond. Although I've had to become obsessed. Writing these books, I get called on all the time to be a kind of rent-a-Bond pundit, just because I've had to immerse myself so fully in that world.
Did you have to reread all the books to get all the right clues for what the young Bond might be like?
Yeah, the first thing I did when they gave me the job was to go back and read all the books in sequence and make any notes of any sort of biographical background information. But there's very little in the books, and some of it is inconsistent because Fleming was making it up as he went along. and he would change facts from one book to another. He never went back and reread them. The literary world was very different in those days. It wasn't all this sort of constant scrutiny, and you write 3 books now and there's huge websites and people compiling all this information about it. Back then he was just enjoying himself, and if he wanted to change some of Bond's backstory from one book to another, he would. So I mean, Vince, he kept changing when Bond would have been born so that he could keep him roughly in his mid-30s over 15 years.